Beating. Role: basic physical punishment and coercion. Equipment name: whip, rod, fist. Description: beating is one of the most basic and ancient forms of physical punishment used to discipline, punish, or extract confessions. The equipment used includes whips, rods, or simply fists. The victim is struck repeatedly, causing physical injuries such as bruises, broken bones, and internal damage. This method was employed in various cultures, including ancient Rome and modern authoritarian states, often leaving lasting physical and psychological scars. Waterboarding. Role: inducing fear and panic to extract information. Equipment name: cloth and water. Description: waterboarding is a technique that induces the sensation of drowning to coerce information or confessions. The victim is laid back, with a cloth placed over their face, and water is poured over it. This blocks the airways, causing a terrifying feeling of suffocation and imminent death. Used historically during the Spanish Inquisition and more recently in counterterrorism efforts, it is highly effective in breaking the will of the victim without leaving physical marks. Electric shock. Role: inflicting pain and fear for compliance. Equipment name: electrodes and power source. Description: electric shock torture involves applying electric currents to the body using electrodes, causing intense pain and involuntary muscle contractions. The electrodes are placed on sensitive areas, and the current's intensity can be adjusted to increase pain. This method, used by regimes like those during Argentina's Dirty War, serves to intimidate and force compliance. While it leaves minimal physical evidence, the psychological and nerve damage can be severe and long-lasting. Forced standing. Role: inducing physical exhaustion and pain. Equipment name: shackles, restraints. Description: forced standing involves restraining the victim in a standing position for extended periods. Shackles or other restraints are used to prevent movement, causing extreme discomfort and pain in the legs, feet, and back. This method, used by the Nazis in concentration camps and the Soviets in gulags, was intended to physically and mentally exhaust prisoners, breaking their resistance through prolonged discomfort and stress. Burning. Role: inflicting severe pain and psychological trauma. Equipment name: fire, hot iron, chemicals. Description: burning as a form of torture involves using fire, heated objects, or chemicals to cause severe burns. The equipment can include branding irons, open flames, or caustic substances. Historically used during the Middle Ages, for example, to punish heretics by burning them at the stake, it inflicted extreme pain and served as a public spectacle to instill fear. Modern instances include the use of chemical burns in some regimes. The physical and psychological impacts are profound, often leading to disfigurement and long-term trauma. Scaphism. Role: prolonged suffering and execution. Equipment name: boats, milk, honey. Description: scaphism, an ancient Persian method of torture, involved placing the victim inside two boats or hollowed-out tree trunks, with only the head, hands, and feet protruding. The victim was force-fed milk and honey, which attracted insects to feed on the exposed flesh. This gruesome method aimed to prolong suffering, often leading to death from exposure, infection, or septic shock. It was used primarily for heinous crimes or treason, making an example of the victim's prolonged agony. Crucifixion. Role: execution and deterrence. Equipment name: wooden cross, nails, ropes. Description: crucifixion was a method of execution where the victim was nailed or tied to a large wooden cross and left to die. The equipment includes a cross, nails, or ropes. Victims suffered severe pain from the nails or ropes, dehydration, and asphyxiation as they struggled to breathe. Used primarily by the Roman Empire, it served as a powerful deterrent by making a public example of those who defied the state. The most famous crucifixion was that of Jesus Christ, which has deep religious significance. Iron Maiden. Role: psychological intimidation and slow death. Equipment name: iron cabinet, interior spikes. Description: the Iron Maiden was a medieval torture device consisting of an iron cabinet with a hinged front and spikes inside. When closed, the spikes would pierce the victim's body, causing slow, agonizing injuries without hitting vital organs immediately. Though some believe it may be more mythical than historical, it symbolizes the brutal and imaginative methods of torture used during the Middle Ages. The device inflicted extreme physical pain and served as a psychological tool to instill fear. Thumbscrews. Role: inflicting intense pain and coercion. Equipment name: metal screws and plates. Description: thumbscrews were small devices designed to crush the thumbs or fingers. The equipment consisted of two metal plates connected by screws. The victim's thumbs or fingers were placed between the plates, and the screws were tightened gradually, causing intense pain. This method was notably used during the European witch hunts to extract confessions. The threat and application of this device often led to false confessions due to the unbearable pain. Strappado. Role: physical torture and confession extraction. Equipment name: ropes, pulley system. Description: the strappado involved tying the victim's hands behind their back and suspending them by a rope from a high point. Sometimes, weights were added to the feet. This method caused dislocated shoulders, severe pain, and long-term damage. It was widely used during the Spanish Inquisition and other European powers to extract confessions or information. The intense pain from stretched ligaments and joints made it a particularly effective form of torture. Rack. Role: extreme physical torture for information extraction. Equipment name: stretcher, rollers, cranks. Description: the rack was a device that stretched the victim's body by pulling the limbs in opposite directions. It consisted of a large wooden frame with rollers and cranks. The victim's ankles and wrists were tied to the rollers, which were then slowly turned, causing severe pain, dislocated joints, and torn ligaments. Used primarily during the Inquisition and in medieval Europe, the rack was designed to extract confessions through excruciating pain, often leaving the victim permanently crippled. Branding. Role: punishment and marking of criminals. Equipment name: branding iron, heat source. Description: branding involved using a heated metal object to burn a permanent mark onto the victim's skin. The equipment included a branding iron and a heat source, such as a fire or furnace. This method was used across various cultures, including ancient Rome and colonial America, to punish criminals, slaves, or dissidents. The pain was intense, and the resulting scar served as a permanent mark of shame, leading to social ostracism and psychological trauma. Garrote. Role: execution method and deterrence. Equipment name: wire or cord, tightening mechanism. Description: the garrote was a device used for strangulation, typically consisting of a wire or cord tightened around the victim's neck. The equipment included a chair with a mechanism to tighten the wire gradually, cutting off airflow. This method, used in Spain until the late 20th century, was intended both as a punishment and a deterrent. The victim would die from slow suffocation, and in some versions, a spike would pierce the spinal cord for a quicker death. Boiling. Role: extreme execution and public deterrence. Equipment name: cauldron, fire, boiling liquid. Description: boiling involved submerging the victim in boiling water, oil, or other liquids, using a cauldron and a heat source. This method was used in medieval Europe and Asia to execute criminals and traitors, causing severe burns and a slow, painful death. The public nature of these executions served as a dire warning to others. The victim often succumbed to shock or organ failure, with the horrific method designed to instill fear. Impalement. Role: method of prolonged torture and execution. Equipment name: wooden stake, support structures. Description: impalement involved driving a stake through the victim's body, often avoiding vital organs to prolong suffering. The equipment used included a sharpened wooden stake and support structures to hold the victim in place. This gruesome method, employed by the Ottoman Empire and figures like Vlad the Impaler, was intended to cause a slow and agonizing death. It served as a potent deterrent, instilling fear and demonstrating the consequences of defiance. Keel hauling. Role: nautical punishment and torture. Equipment name: rope, ship's keel. Description: keel hauling was a maritime punishment where the victim was dragged under the ship's keel, often resulting in severe injuries from barnacles and rough surfaces. The equipment involved a sturdy rope and the ship's keel itself. This method was used primarily by pirates and navies in the 17th and 18th centuries to discipline crew members or punish pirates. The victim would be tied to the rope and hauled across the underside of the ship, risking drowning, lacerations, and blunt force trauma. It was a terrifying punishment meant to enforce discipline through fear. Rat torture. Role: psychological and physical torture. Equipment name: rat cage, heat source. Description: rat torture involved placing a cage containing rats on the victim's body and heating the cage, forcing the rats to burrow into the victim to escape the heat. The equipment consisted of a metal cage and a heat source, such as hot coals or an open flame. This method was used during the Spanish Inquisition and by various totalitarian regimes to extract confessions or as a form of punishment. The psychological horror of being eaten alive, combined with the physical pain, made it an effective method of instilling fear and compliance. Pair of anguish. Role: intimate torture and punishment. Equipment name: pear-shaped device, screw mechanism. Description: the pear of anguish was a metal device with segments that could expand outward when a screw was turned. The device was inserted into the victim's mouth, rectum, or vagina and then expanded, causing severe internal injuries. Used in medieval Europe to punish heretics, blasphemers, and homosexuals, this method inflicted excruciating pain and humiliation. The equipment was designed to cause as much discomfort as possible, both physically and psychologically, making it a particularly feared instrument of torture.